it's really hungry, because it doesn't matter what I brought for lunch or what time I ate. I think it's more has to do with I'm ready to be home with my family, sitting around a table. There's something about that meal too that sitting at the table, it just kind of slows everything down. It doesn't matter what's been going on throughout the day or what's on anybody's mind, but it's just a time to reconnect, to find out how everybody is. It's a time to find out how their day went, what new things they're getting into. We also all have that like favorite meal, favorite family around the table meal. I'm sure you're thinking of yours right now. Mine, I just love pot roast. Something about a slow cooker coming in, the meal's ready, everybody sits down. There's something right about that. I'm sure Jesus and his disciples shared a lot of meals together. But when you speak about Jesus eating with the disciples, one meal stands out above the rest. So much so that it's given its own name. The Last Supper. And that's an especially interesting meal because they didn't just eat together. Now, granted, it was part of Passover, and there were some things that they did that were specific to that Jewish holiday. But I've really been thinking about one line here lately. When Jesus broke the bread and he shared it with his disciples, he said, "As often as you do this in remembrance of me." Back when we were meeting regularly in our building, I remember we would offer communion, what we call it, the Lord's Supper. We would offer that every Sunday, an opportunity during the service for you to break away with your family, kind of part of the worship, and have that special time together. And since we haven't been meeting regularly, we did have one big communion service outdoors before we moved out of our mission location. And since then, we've encouraged, families and groups and watch parties to take some time to drink a cup of grape juice, eat a cracker, and remember Christ's sacrifice. But I think it goes beyond that. Jesus was eating a meal with his disciples, and he took the bread and he broke it. Amy reminded us last week during Youth Sunday that bread may not be a common thing now and where we are in life, but it was a very, very common thing in the early church. Bread was a staple in those cultures, and breaking bread was a normal part of the meal. It's something that every Jewish person would do at every meal. They would break bread together. Nowadays we say, no bread for me, I'm on a low carb diet. But when Jesus broke that bread, that was something that the disciples did every day, multiple times a day. And when Jesus broke that bread, he said, "As often as you do this in remembrance of me." So when we have the discussion of how often should we partake in the Lord's Supper, well, I don't know how often you feel like you should have a cracker and a little cup of grape juice, but I think Jesus is saying every time you sit down at a meal, every time you eat together as a community, remember what's about to happen 2,000 years ago. What we remember as his crucifixion and resurrection. There's another interesting thing besides the fact that every Jewish home would break bread every day. By instituting something during a meal, Jesus ensured that no matter how cultures change, no matter what new technology we incorporate into our lives, no matter how our schedules might become more busy or less busy, no matter whether we're, facing a time of peace or a time of war, a time of health, a pandemic, whether we're following a great leader or sitting in the midst of political uncertainty, one constant in the midst of all of that is the fact that we have to break bread. We can't go through life without eating. And so, just like Jesus knew that we would constantly be feeding our physical body, he wanted to also ensure that we were feeding our spiritual body as well, which is just as important. We're not meant to go through life starving, both from food and also from connection. He wanted us to get back together. Though we might go our separate ways, to make time to reconnect, to feed our physical body and our spiritual body. And that's what I've said before. I don't know if you have this habit, but you really should get in the habit of family mealtime as often as possible. And it takes work, no doubt. Schedules, even in the midst of being quarantined and socially distanced, seems like schedules haven't diminished at all. But it is important. It's important for your health. It's important for your family's health. It's important for your children's health. It's important for your friendships, your relationships, that you sit down and reconnect. And Jesus says, when you do that, I want to be right there in the middle of all of it. When you sit down and start talking about your day, I want to be a part of that. When you ask each other how things are going in school, in work, at home, I want to be right there in the middle of that conversation. Because the sacrifice that's being made, the price that's being paid, is not so that you can only have some kind of future home, pie in the sky, streets of gold, leave this world behind. I paid this price so that you could become back into community, back into the garden, living with each other and with the divine in peace. And reconnecting is a small glimpse of what we'll get to experience forever in heaven. And so make some time to eat that meal with your family at a table as often as possible. Make that time to join a small group, an interest group, a watch party, so that you can get back in community with other fellow believers. Because that's what we need. That's what we're spiritually hungry for. And God knows that. That's why He died. So that we could live full and free. It's time for a meal. See you guys next time. Forgot to turn the car off.